It's funny. As I was preparing, I thought, oh my goodness, it's a new season, a new topic, and sometimes how you feel nervous, you think, oh, do I have anything really to share? But I know that the Word of God is so special, and there's always something to learn from the Word of God. So we're just going to get started. And who doesn't love a Cinderella story? I mean, who doesn't love a Cinderella story? And this is like a Cinderella story. It is almost from rags to riches. And so I started Googling. I thought, Google some famous Cinderella stories or some famous stories, and it was amazing. Some of the different things that have happened. You get people who have come from awful backgrounds and then they rise up. And I'd written down a few here so that I can just remind myself and remind you. Apparently, Richard Branson, when he was at school, he didn't do well at school. He was dyslexic and was really frustrated, would talk a lot, and his head teacher said, you will either become a millionaire or you will end up in prison with your mouth. And of course, then he left school at 16, no qualifications, nothing. And we know, he's just done exceptionally well. And just that determination, Oprah Winfrey, we all know Oprah Winfrey. She grew up in a very, very poor single mom household in Mississippi. She was molested and abused as a little girl. She ran away at the age of 13. 14, she had a baby, and then the baby died. And she somehow managed to get a scholarship that brought her into university. And then she went into a beauty contest, and then different things happened. And at 19, she started going into journalism. And now her net worth is $2.5 billion. I mean, it just is amazing from a poor girl that started off. Dolly Parton, the fourth of 12 children, grew up. She'll always talk about how poor her family were and then how she was used. And so there's story after story. In fact, Roman Abramovich, that Russian guy that bought some football club, which I can't even remember which one it was born into poverty and orphaned and grew up in an orphanage. And then he was raised by an uncle and then finally managed to get himself into college and became, technical college. And he started a small little company producing plastic toys. He is now one of the wealthiest people in the world. So it is amazing, all these self-made people that have done really well for themselves. And today we're going to be looking at this other person, which is Joseph. You see, the difference between a self-made person and a God-made person is that the self-made person is all about themselves, how they worked hard, how they determined, they've got a story of what they did. But you see, Joseph, he gives all the glory to God. It's not about him. It's all about God. And each one of us in this room here has a story. Each one of us is a potential Joseph. We're all unique. We've all got a gift within us. We've all got something God breathed on our lives. And what happens is, it's when we surrender and say, Lord, I just don't have anything to give. This isn't my forte. I'm not really good at this. And God breathes into you and something supernatural happens. And then we give the glory to him because it's not about us anyways. And I sometimes look at some Christian celebrities who have kind of grown up and they've done well and they've become famous and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly it goes pear-shaped somewhere along the ministry. And I think pride gets in. Pride was a thing that is a battle for all of us. And pride is something that Jesus spoke so much against pride. And so when you think, oh, this is all about me, it's my skill, it's my giftings, it's this, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that, and then suddenly it all comes crashing down because it all becomes about us and not about God. And if we learn if we always learn to give him the glory and reflect all the praise back to him, then he will bless us abundantly above and beyond. So, there's only two things I'm going to talk about today, and two things I want you to remember. God uses ordinary people. And the second thing is that, where's my second point? The second thing is that when God gives a word, his word will come true. So he uses ordinary people, and when God speaks, his word will come to fruition. So we're looking at Joseph. And Joseph has come from this very, very interesting background. He's come from a great lineage. and his granddad, his great-granddad, all these people, everything is going great for Joseph. But Joseph finds himself not living in the promised land. He is living in a foreign country that's foreign to him. He was born there. He's growing up with a mum and a dad that really aren't walking well with God. He's growing up in an idol-worshipping community, and Joseph is growing up in this very difficult environment, and he doesn't have much going on, but there's something in him. There's something in him. And he's come from, some of us can speak about this great lineage. My granddad, and I've spoken to people, I'm the fourth or fifth. I spoke to one couple last year. We met them, and they were like, we're fifth generation pastors in our family. I'm thinking, great. And they can make you feel really small, and they can make you feel really insignificant. It doesn't matter what you've come from. It's what are you doing with what you have now? And that's what God is interested in. So we've got Joseph. So we've got Joseph here. His great-grandparents were Abraham and Sarah. Fantastic people. However, there was lies and deceit, and they tried to fix problems. And he slept with Hagar, and they had Ishmael. We know that story. He also lied about his wife. So even though they were wonderful people, and Abraham's called a friend of God, there's problems in their world. Then they have this wonderful son, Isaac, and they think, great, everything's fine. Isaac's married Rebecca. Everything is going great. But again, we are what we are from inside. My granny used to say something. I can't say it in Doric, but it means you can't get away from your own folk. She always used to say that. And what she meant with that, it wasn't like a curse she was putting on people, but you see traits and you see characteristics, and you see DNA that has come from your mom or your dad or your grandparents. You look at your children or whatever, and you think, that's exactly like you. I can't stand that in you. How are you behaving like that? You're just behaving like I did. Learn from me. It's just in us. And my granny say, I can't say it in Doric, but she say, you can't get away from your own folk. And so this is what Joseph is. So then there's Jacob, Isaac and Rebecca. They're living here. Everything is going great. And, there's all sorts of problems because they allow favoritism to come in. One loves the son, one loves the other son, Jacob and Esau. And so, there's deceit. She helps her son deceive. We know the story of that. And so they are just acting out what they saw their parents act out. So Isaac said, I remember my dad did this, and I heard my mom did this, so let's do this. In fact, Isaac lied about Rebecca being his wife, just like his dad did. And so we've got favoritism, we've got all sorts of different things and going on there. And then so Jacob runs away, and Rebecca says, you need to go back to where I came from. You need to go there and find a wife. Interesting, God called Abraham from this area to come to the promised land. 200 years have now passed. And guess what? Jacob is going back to where Abraham came from. And you think, what's going on? God pulled him out of there. They're supposed to be living in the promised land. Everything's supposed to be happening. But now Jacob has gone back, and he's found Leah and Rebecca, and he's married them, and we know the story there. And so there's this very dysfunctional family. But you know something? God loves dysfunction. God loves everything. God can use any family, and God can work in any circumstance. God is found in the dysfunctional. He is found in the broken family. He is found in the single mom family, single dad family. He's found in the wayward, rebellious family. He's found in the same-sex family. He's found in any way. There's one person I've been following, I follow online. His name is Ross Johnston. And his story is, he said, I was born because of artificial insemination. I grew up in a lesbian household. And his story is incredible. He said he always had this orphan spirit, because this orphan spirit, he had this longing for a dad because his other friends had a dad and he didn't have one. So it's so interesting listening to his story. But then someone, when he was 16, invited him to come to church. And he said his orphan spirit came alive because he thought, I do have a dad. He's in heaven. And so something came alive. And God called him, and he's got an interesting story how he found Jesus, how he kind of went back. And since 2020, he has become this evangelist, and God is using him up and down California and in some major cities in America to reach into this LGBT community, and thousands are finding Jesus. Thousands are coming safe because he said, God saw me in this family and God called me out. So there is no family beyond redemption. There is no dysfunctionality that you can have that makes an excuse for what God can do in your life. You know, you look at some of the missionaries that left from our shores from Aberdeen here. You know, Mary Slessor was a missionary that grew up in Aberdeen. And she grew up with an alcoholic father and all this kind of stuff. At the age of 11, her mom moved to Dundee in this awful life. And to escape her drunken dad and that, she would go down to this little church because they had a little Sunday school meeting. She became an incredible missionary. You speak to any Nigerian and they will tell you they have a National Mary Slessor Day because she impacted the country with the love of Jesus. And so when she went there, you know, if you had twins, they thought you were possessed by an evil spirit, and they would drown both the babies. So she actually came and said, no, this isn't the case. And she actually changed the politics in the country. So it's actually incredible. But she came from she was just off Mount Tooley. She grew up in a little flat here, dysfunctional family, alcoholic dad, one of a few different kids, and didn't know anything about Jesus. When they moved to Dundee, she found something. Then when her dad died, she said that's when she finally had peace in her life. So, you know, God uses everybody. And so we find Joseph here. Joseph is grown up, and his dad has worked for 7 years in this place. He's worked for 7 years to marry the love of his life, Rachel. And at the end of 7 years, Laban, you know, tricks him and says, sorry, you know, you've got this wife instead. So he then gets Leah, and then he gets Rachel, and he has to work for another 7 years. Reading this story and commentaries, Jacob only lived there for 20 years. So 7 years, there are no babies because he's working for this wife. The last 6 years, there are also no babies because he's actually just working. And there's only 7 years, and in those 7 years, 11 boys are born. So, you know, in my mind, Joseph is a nice, cute little boy, and his brothers are big and strong. He's the same age as a lot of them. They're the same age as him. I never had thought that before, but he is. He's the same age as them. And so when you look at all these, you know, I'll put a chart up next week when I've written it. When you look at all their births, 11 of them have been born in 7 years. So you probably had Leah pregnant at the same time as Bilhah, pregnant at the same time as the other one. They were all having babies together. 11, imagine 11 boys, and there was a girl in there. 12 children in 7 years. That's a very, very busy household. And that's where we find our hero. He's growing up there. He's watching things. So they've had all these babies, and then, you know, he says, you know, Laban, I want to go home. And Laban says, no, you have to work. So he works another 6 more years, and there's no record of any babies or boys being born in those 6 years. I believe, you know, Benjamin was born and conceived probably on the journey home. Anyways, that's another story. So we've got Joseph here. Joseph has been born, and he observes tensions. Can you imagine growing up in a household where you've got your mom, you adore your mom, you know your dad adores your mom, you know she's the favorite wife, but you are, you know, you're watching how it all plays out. You hear things. You watch the tension between Leah and him. And when Joseph is born, the dad, of course, adores him because it's his favorite wife. It's, you know, and so you can imagine, even from the young age, jealousy has come in. And why does he get the best gift at Christmas time? Why does he get this? Why is he always favored? Why does he get more food? Why does he get the sweets? You know, if you have more than one child, the word that you hear more than anything is, it's not fair. They've got this. And when children learn to count, it's a disaster. They count 5 carrots on their table. And they've got 3 carrots here. You've given her 3 carrots and you've given me 5. I'm not eating 5 if she's only eaten 3. You know, so favoritism in a normal household. But can you imagine growing up in a household where you are the favored one and all of this? And it's really, really hard. So he grows up listening to this. He grows up watching the tension. And I believe that Joseph had a spirit that was in him that was different from anyone else. I believe they all had the same kind of spirit, but I think he was maybe kept there. And I wonder if did his dad say to him, you know what, you're really special. Let me tell you about my mom and dad. And he goes, where's Granny and Granddad? Well, I know there's Laban, but Jacob would say, let me tell you about my mom and dad. You would love Isaac and Rebecca. They're really lovely. They're your grandparents. And, he was a special child. They would I believe he would tell stories to all of them. I believe Joseph was the sponge that soaked, I think, a lot of it in. So he's growing up in this godless culture. We know that his mom is a beautiful person, because it says that. So Jacob probably was actually very good looking himself and a very handsome little boy, because we know that many years later Potiphar's wife fancied him. So he's grown up, probably really talented, really good looking, those kind of kids that you hate. They're like, oh, he didn't get the freckles, or he didn't get the orange hair, or whatever, So that is Joseph, and he's growing up almost in this type of position. But he's also growing up seeing the tension and seeing the culture, and he's looking at his mom and thinking, why'd you pray to these idols? Because his mom is an idol worshiper. She has taken on the culture. I believe Leah and her took on the culture, but I believe Leah's heart was changed. I believe Leah, through her trauma of not being loved, found the love in Jesus. And I believe Leah changed. But I believe Rachel, she didn't need to, everybody loved her. She was beautiful. She was wonderful. And I believe Rachel, it says that she was an idol worshiper. So he would watch his mom idol worshiping. He would listen to stories of his dad. He's kind of grown up confused, but this is little Joseph. And when Rachel finally does go to get pregnant, she begs Reuben to get these mandrakes. If you get these, I'll get, she's putting her faith in the luck of the mandrakes. Maybe this will be something that'll allow me to get pregnant. She's putting her faith in something else. And she's annoyed at Jacob. She goes, why don't you give me children? It's as if it's his fault, as if it's his God's fault. She's praying to her idol. She's using superstition. And then it says clearly in the Bible, and then God remembered Rachel. It was all about God's timing and God's planning, And Jacob then gathers his wives. After being there for 20 years, he thinks the Lord's stirring his heart, saying, you need to go back. You need to face the consequences of Esau. It's time to go back. And he says to his wives here, he says, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it used to be, but the God of my father has been with me. That word, but the God, that comes up a lot of times in Genesis. But God was with Joseph. But God went down to Egypt with him. And Jacob is saying it here. But the God of my father has protected me from your dad Laban. He's tried to harm me, but God has saved me and protected me. And he's cheated my wages, but God has blessed me. God, I've walked in favor not because of what I've done, but because what has God done through me. So they have this secret plan to leave and to go back. Joseph has grown up in a very, very dysfunctional family. He hears the plot. He hears how they're going to get up in the middle of the night. They're going to leave in the middle of the night. They're going to escape and they're going to go. That's really hard for a little boy of 6 or 7 when he leaves. He's leaving. He doesn't get to say goodbye to his granddad, to his other cousins, to anything. They're just, quick, let's go. And he's going. He has no choice in the matter. He's a little 6-year-old boy. But he's listening to all the plots. And a few days later, Laban realizes they're there. Laban catches up with them. He's going to kill them. So, Joseph is in this insecure environment. Oh, what are we going to do? When children are anxious, they hear the anxiety you have. Here's Laban. What's going to happen? And Laban actually wants to kill Joseph. He's so angry. But God speaks to Laban and says, don't lay a hand on Joseph. Don't lay on Jacob. Don't lay a hand on him. So Joseph is exposed, I believe. They didn't live in houses that we did. They lived in tents. So you hear every conversation. You hear everything that's going on. So he's exposed to deceit. He's exposed to planning. He's exposed to lies. He's exposed to unkind words being said about his mom from Leah. You hear all sorts of things. He's exposed to all of these things. So in some ways you think, this guy has not much of a future. He's an insecure little boy. He's being bullied by his family. He's not loved by his family. And yet God can use him. God can use him in the most amazing way. And then he has to say goodbye to his granddad. It says in the Bible, Laban hugged them tightly and kissed them. Laban was never going to see them again. There's no emails or text or letters or anything else. Laban says goodbye, and it's like saying goodbye to that world. So little Joseph is on this journey. And, but when Laban's there, he says, there's one thing that makes me mad is, where's those idols? And, they're all searching for them. And Jacob says, if you find the person that has it, of course you can take it. So you can kill that person. But anyways, I don't want to go into that story. But Joseph is exposed to hearing his mom telling lies. Oh, I don't know where they are. She's sitting on the camel and hiding them. So again, he's exposed to lies. And this is how our family works. This is the DNA of our family. We lie, we manipulate, we cheat. We do anything to save our skin. We try to fix our own problems. We try to solve our own issues. We're not depending on God. And he watches all of that. And he also watches when then he hears the plan, oh, we're going to meet Esau. How are we going to do this? And Jacob's panicking. Jacob says, Esau, my brother, wants to kill me. And little Joseph's thinking, now I'm going to lose my dad. I've lost my granddad. I'm going to lose my dad. What's going to happen? Who is this Uncle Esau? And he hears the plot, and he hears how, again, his dad is like, what we'll do is we'll send this gift, and then, those servant girls, you go with your 4 kids. You're not that really important. Then we'll put Leah next, and her 6 boys, and Dinah, you can go next. And then finally we'll come. And if he kills off them, and if he does that, when he comes to me, he'll then finally be appeased. Joseph knows, and the brothers know. Why is he at the back? Why have you put him at the back? The dad is protecting him and willing to sacrifice them, especially those 4 boys of those 2 servant ladies. I'd never thought of that before. Those 4 boys were put at the front with the sheep and the cattle. So if Esau was going to kill anybody, he was going to kill those 4 boys. I think it was Dan and Natalie, and there was 2 others. And can you imagine the resentment? My life isn't that valuable, but his life is valuable. And then Leah's boys, why is he at the back? Why do you favor him? Why can't he come with us? Don't forget, Joseph is the same age as them. And those little boys, Joseph was maybe 6. Well, the next one was probably 7 or 8. So it's not like they were all big men there and Joseph was being kept. They were all children. And he's putting his children out there. And so this is the kind of family that he's come from. But Joseph, I believe, so Joseph sees all of this, but Joseph also watches something. He watches his dad. He watches his dad put everyone across and say, right, I'm going over here. His dad meets with God and has the most amazing encounter. And when he meets God, God gives him a new name. He changes his name from Jacob to Israel. God gives him a new identity. He gives him a new purpose. And God gives him a limp. For the rest of his life, he has this limp that will always remind him that he wrestled with God, but God saved his life. So when he sees his dad the next day, he sees his dad limping. Dad, what's happened? It's okay, son. I've got a fresh revelation of what's going to happen. Everything's going to be okay. And for the rest of his life, little Joseph sees his dad limping. He knows that there is a God. His dad, there's no record of his dad deceiving people again, lying or manipulating again after that encounter with God. I have read through the Bible and there isn't any. He's done plenty of that beforehand. His very name means deceiver. And the age that Jacob meets his brother Esau, they're both 97 years old. These are old men. And they're old men. I think their birthright was probably in their 20s or 30s is when he managed to steal the birthright. So for 60 years, he's lived under this cloud of Esau's going to kill me. But he goes out with a confidence, no, I've met with God. It's going to be okay. God is my healer. God is going to look after me. And so because he meets God, he walks with this limp. He knows that there's something happening. God uses our mistakes. God uses our wanderings into the other land looking for a wife. God uses our backsliding. God uses our dark threads for his good. He works in spite of us. He works in spite of us. He works even when we've left the promised land, when we don't go to church anymore and we're wandering around thinking, I don't need it anymore. He works in spite of us. And he uses those threads so that when we come back and find Jesus, we can use those stories to bring someone along. Hey, listen, let me tell you what happened to me. This is where I went wrong, but let me pull you along on the journey with me. So God does this. You know, I wonder that those 20 years of living away, when Jacob was living away from the influence of his father Isaac, I wonder how much he observed the culture and thought, you know what, there has to be more than idols. There has to be more than this in my life. Just like the prodigal son, there has to be more than a pig pen. I need to go home. And so after 20 years, he decides to go back and brings his family and all these little boys with him. He comes back to fulfill God's promise in his life. There's a proud man, a scared man, a deceiving man going out, but coming back is a humble man, a submitted man, whatever you will, not my will, Lord. An older man coming back, and the dread of encountering his brother is over. You know, if I live, I live. If I die, I die. But I'm obeying God and I'm coming back. So remember, God uses ordinary families and he uses us in supernatural ways. The second thing is God's promises will be fulfilled. Now, I said to you 200 years ago, God had said to Abraham, Abraham, look at the stars. I'm going to make your descendants this big. So we look back 200 years later, you know, the promised family isn't even living there. They're living over here, and some of them are worshiping idols, and everything's going wrong. But also God spoke to Abraham 200 years earlier. Listen to these words that God speaks to Abraham. You know, he said, as the sun was going down, this is in Genesis 15, as the sun was going down, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came upon him. The Lord said to him, Abraham, you can be sure that your descendants that I've told you you're going to have, your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, and they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. And as for you, you will die in peace, and you will be buried at a ripe old age. And after 4 generations, your descendants that are going to be in Egypt will come back to this very land. Now, that didn't make much sense, did it? Because it's now about, 500-600 years since that prophecy was given. The Lord spoke to Abraham, and the Lord spoke to him, and that was going to be a long, long time, hundreds of years later before that was fulfilled. But if God makes a promise, he will fulfill it. And recently we've been thinking about prayer and fasting and thinking about our nation. I remember this prophecy that's been spoken over this land, and I would encourage you to Google Jean Darnell. I read it, and I read it with such an excitement. It speaks about the young people in this country rising up as preachers, as worship leaders, as people filled with the Holy Spirit. That prophecy, I believe, we're starting to see that fulfilled now. It speaks about the churches rising up. It speaks about denominations putting aside their differences and looking for the greater good. Those words, when God gives a word, it will happen. So these words still have to come through, but they haven't come through yet. So whatever God has promised, he will fulfill. Even though you have left the promised land, even though things have gone wrong, God will fulfill it. And when this family come back, still awful things happen to this family. Difficult things happen. There's a rape. The daughter Dinah, she gets raped by people. And then the 2 boys that they bring revenge. 2 of the sons, Levi and Simeon, want to bring revenge on that. Joseph is witnessing all of this. He's watching what his brothers are like. He's listening about that happened to his sister. He's watching these things. So imagine this little boy. He's now 12 or 13 years old. He's there. He's listening to these reports. What happened to my big sister? What did my brothers do? Then he hears about Reuben, the oldest brother. He decides that he's going to sleep with one of his half-brother's wives. So, when you listen to this story, you think, oh my goodness, my life maybe just isn't that bad. Maybe all the dysfunctionality of my life is just not as bad as I thought it was. Have you had someone had incest with some, with your stepmother? I mean, it just is awful. And worse things happen, awful things happen. But God works in the awful. God works in the dysfunctional. And that's what I think is quite amazing. And Joseph is watching all of this, observing all of this. And I believe, when Joseph came back, Isaac was still alive. Isaac didn't die until Joseph was actually taken by the Ishmaelites. So Isaac went through that mourning, and I wonder what Isaac's thoughts were. I wonder if we'll ever see Joseph again. Did he remember that prophecy given to his dad? I wonder where they've taken him to. Did he go to Egypt? What foreign land was that word given to my dad? You just wonder all these things, don't you? I think about all these things. My imagination goes a little bit wild. And I just think about, what happened. But, Joseph, of course, all his favoritism is not good, but this favoritism still exists even in the promised land. It's like, no, you stay at home with me. So Joseph is staying at home with dad. Joseph has lost his mum by now, so dad's probably like, oh, poor little boy, he's lost his mum. They've all got their mums and all that. I'm just going to keep him here. He doesn't have to work like anybody else. He's staying at home. But I believe as he's staying at home, he's like, Granddad, Isaac, tell me some stories. Tell me about my great-granddad. Tell me about the words God spoke. Tell me what happened. Tell me those great stories. And tell me about, how did you meet Granny? How did you find Rebecca? What was that like? Tell me about my Uncle Laban then. So, I believe he heard the stories. God was stirring in him. You can have a whole bunch of bad eggs, but God just needs a good egg. And it's not like, it's not like it's a good egg or a bad egg. God needs a submitted egg, okay? Because all of us are bad eggs. All of us have sin. But it's when any one of those brothers could have said, I submit myself. I want to find out more about God. But it was Joseph that thought, yeah, I need to find out more. And his dad trusted him. His dad would say, listen, Joseph, go and find out what's happening with your brothers and tell me what's going on. He could trust him. Because remember, trust is something that they haven't seen in that family for generations. They can't trust each other. They can't trust what people say. They have existed on lies and manipulation. But Isaac trusts Joseph. And he trusts Joseph with stories and with what Joseph, the reports that Joseph brings back. So that's all I wanted to say today in just setting up for finding out about Joseph next week. Joseph, God uses the ordinary person and he breathes the extraordinary upon them. God has a call and a purpose for everyone. God had a call and a purpose for each one of those brothers. Those brothers became the heads of tribes. They came down to Egypt. They were different men that came down to Egypt. I believe God used them and they all had an incredible encounter with him. Sometimes people take a lot longer to get that encounter with God. Trials in our lives come to improve us or to prove us. Okay? Sometimes our trials come to improve us through the valleys, or sometimes it comes to just test us and prove us. And what is his plan for your life? And I'm just going to stop just there. I was going to talk about just a personal story with my mom. I'll maybe just finish with that story by my mom. Sometimes someone said to me once, they said, oh, you've come from such a great family, and everything. And I said, oh, you need to speak to my mom. You need to hear her story. And my mom isn't able to share her story anymore. In fact, for most of her life, my mom never shared her story. She was too full of shame to share her story. But she grew up in a household where her mom had got pregnant before she was married, which was frowned on those days, and lost the baby. Then her mom got pregnant with her, and they got married. And then her dad committed suicide. I mean, this is in the 30s. And the shame of having a dad that committed suicide, she was never told about that. Then her mum is a single mum with my wee mum is raising her, and then she goes out drinking and all that because she's so depressed. She meets some random guy. She shacks up with him. They get married. He's full of alcohol abuse, and so she grows up in a household where she's witnessing alcoholism. She's witnessing the effects of that. She's witnessing all sorts of things. People shun her. She remembers asking a question once, and people made a comment to her about her father. So she didn't know all these things. But when she was 12 years old, there was a young man, and there was a man in his 20s in the street that started having a little service for children and invited my mom as a 12-year-old, and she found out about Jesus, and she never looked back. And she carried this shame. She never wanted, her mom smoked all her life. She thought, and those days nobody smoked. She thought that was just such a sinful thing. And her family never found Jesus. Her sister that came to see her last year has never bowed the knees and found Jesus. Mom didn't grow up like that. But because she was faithful as a 12-year-old, because the Lord saw a yielded heart, a heart that said, I want to do something. I want to write a different story from my family. And see, and that's the story of Joseph. And so you look on to my mom and you look at her 4 children that all love Jesus. You look at her 15 grandchildren. 12 of them are going on well with God. There's still 3 that need to find Jesus. You look at these 28 now great-grandchildren. So wow, we've got a burden to pray for them. You know, it's amazing. A yielded life can have such benefits and such fruit. God uses the ordinary. God uses the most amazing things, weaves a story, and don't be ashamed of your story. You know, sometimes people go the opposite way and they become so proud of their brokenness, and that's what defines them. But if God can use your brokenness to help someone else, then that's part of your story. So we're going to put up 3 or 4 questions on the board there just to have discussion on your table. If you want to discuss other things, feel free. And if you have prayer requests, if you have things you want to share on your table, you think, you know, could you just pray? I've got something coming up this week. Feel free to say that, and then we'll just close up at about 11. Okay? Thank you.